Okay, so hi everyone, you're very welcome to our second webinar in our series on supporting young people's well-being. This webinar series coincides with the launch of the PAIR-SEEK study. So it's a study we're running in UCD looking at parents and young people's mental health literacy. And we'll be sharing the details of the study later on after the talk. So we're coming towards the end of the school year now and lead up to end of year exams and particularly state exams like the Leaving Cert and the Junior Cert. And it's a really stressful time for young people. If it wasn't stressful enough already, the young people have had to live through the past few months, and there's been a huge level of disruption to their school lives in terms of moving between online schooling and offline schooling, and then also catching up with friends. So with that said, I'm delighted to introduce Elizabeth Charles. She is a senior educational psychologist with the National Educational Psychology Services, who's going to give some tips on how for parents and teachers to manage young people's stress in the school context. So Elizabeth is a mother of 2 teenage children. She was formerly a secondary school teacher, but has been working with NEPs for 21 years. As well as being an educational psychologist, she's also trained as a counsellor and has a master's degree in cognitive behavioural therapy with children and young people. Her research interests lie with working therapeutically in schools to develop young people's well-being and resilience. So with that said, I'm going to hand you over to Elizabeth.
Hi everybody, lovely to see you and very welcome to this evening. I just need to try and work out how to share the screen. Can you see that okay? Daronia, can you? Yeah, fantastic, thank you. You know what, the irony of a psychologist talking about anxiety who is herself suffering at the moment acute performance anxiety is not lost on me. I have thought a lot about this talk, and it's a real whistle-stop tour because managing school stress is an enormous subject and it can cover all sorts of different types of stress. So I've really tried to keep it general. I'm trying to think about my audience. I'm assuming that there are going to be school staff, so teachers and SNAs, and maybe parents and carers and students themselves. So I've tried to keep it really general, and I am hoping that you will find something that's helpful to you in it. It applies to all of us because we all have stress, but some of the examples that I'm going to use are particularly relevant to schools. So let me start with a challenging task. Please sharpen your pencils. We are going to do a very difficult spelling test. I would like you to spell the word Sisyphean. And as you do that, I would like you to notice any thoughts that you have, any feelings that you have about that, any physical sensations in your body, and what you want to do. Maybe you're thinking, are you kidding me? A spelling test? I can't spell. I'm feeling really anxious. I'm reaching for the off button, or maybe I'm going out to make a cup of tea because the last thing I want to do is not be able to spell a word. Or maybe you're thinking, bring it on. Which version of Sisyphean would you like me to spell? Maybe you'd like the Roman version or the Greek version, or maybe you just think that's really boring. The reason that I'm asking you to do this is because I want to use it as an example to illustrate the model that I'm going to use in my talk tonight. And so this model is illustrated on this slide, and it's looking at different aspects of our experience. It's looking at our thoughts, which can be words or pictures in our head. It's looking at our feelings, it's looking at the physical sensations that go with those things in our bodies, and it's looking at our behavior, which is what we don't do or we do. So just notice what is going on for you, and this framework is the one that I'm going to use. So I'm going to go through each section, one section at a time, and give you some strategies to use under each heading. So this is a cognitive behavioral framework, and it links these aspects of our experience together. And this is really important in learning how to regulate or calm ourselves and manage our stress. And if we can notice these different aspects of our experience and pay attention to them, then it can really help us to manage our stress more successfully. Now, I'm not expecting anybody to be a cognitive behavioral therapist, but this model is really helpful for education. because it's all of the things that are in the curriculum, and it's just about developing awareness of ourselves and our internal world and how we relate to other people, and the behaviors that we making informed choices, I guess, about our behaviors. So for the teachers in the audience who want to know the right answer, here it is: Sisyphean. Sisyphean is a task that seems to involve a lot of hard work and will never be finished. An example of this would be keeping enough food in the house to feed 2 teenage boys. It's just impossible to achieve, and it comes from the myth of Sisyphus, who was condemned to roll an enormous boulder up a mountain, and as soon as it got to the top, it rolled back down again. So I'm using this word because I guess for some students, this is what school feels like. Just this never-ending task, hard work, and it's just relentless. And I remember my oldest son going to school. He was quite nervous about going to school when he was 5. And a week after he had done his first week, he came home and he said, "Right, that's it, school's done." And I said, "I'm very sorry to say it's not. You have to go back next week. And actually, you have to stay in school for 18 years. And I guess for him, it must have felt like a Sisyphean task. I think we need to think about what we're asking students to do when they go into school. We're asking them to go into a group of young people initially that they don't know and stay with them potentially for many, many years. They're going to go in and be taught by somebody who has power over them. They're going to be asked to do goodness knows what. They don't know what they're going to ask to have to do, and they don't know if they're going to be able to do it. So it's not surprising that school can be really anxiety provoking for young people. In fact, it's amazing that they enjoy it as much as many of them do. And I think that that's a testament to some of the really amazing teachers that are out there and SNAs that are doing incredible work with young people. I do this spelling test task when I train teachers, and I've done it over many years. And I remember one occasion where a teacher became really anxious. We were doing a really difficult spelling test because I was trying to get them to become aware of different aspects of their experience, and she became really, really anxious. And she asked me, or I was asking her what her thoughts were, and she said, "I'm an English teacher. What am I doing standing up in front of a class of students if I can't spell every word?" And she had set herself this really, really high standard of having to spell every word correctly. Otherwise, what was she doing being an English teacher? And I mean, that's very interesting. And when we come to the section on thoughts, you'll kind of, we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. But this kind of rigid rule around I should be able to do everything perfectly. And actually, we were talking about it, and I was suggesting to her that maybe she was a better English teacher because she couldn't spell every word perfectly, and because she could really understand what that anxiety is like for students sometimes who go in and really struggle with some difficulties with learning. So I want to start by talking about stress, and my first take-home message is I'm really going to suggest to you that we need to get to know our stress and anxiety and make friends with it. We're never going to get rid of it. It's wired into us, and what we really need to do is understand it and notice it and be able to manage it. So feeling stressed is normal and necessary. And our brain is looking out, it's wired, it's evolved to keep us safe. So it's looking out for danger all of the time. It's normal to feel stressed and anxious when we feel safe or threatened in any way, or if we pick up that other people are stressed or threatened, we tend to feel uneasy. So I don't know if you've ever had the experience of you walk into a room and you know that something has gone on, you just feel an atmosphere, and you kind of feel a bit stressed because you know something has gone on. So Stephen Porges calls this neuroception, And this is this unconscious scanning that we do for danger all of the time. And the reason we do it is because our brains have evolved to keep us safe. And once the brain has kind of picked up some kind of threat or danger, it takes over and lots of automatic biology happens. And this is just hardwired into us, and it's in all of us, whether we're adults or children, it's the same for all of us. So when I'm talking about anxiety and stress, I suppose they're overlapping terms, and stress tends to be referring to an external pressure. We usually know what we're stressed about, and usually the symptoms go when it's over. So I have been really stressed about this presentation, but I know that in an hour's time, I'm going to feel fine. I hope it'll go well and it'll have been helpful to you. Whereas anxiety is maybe a kind of fear or an uneasy feeling, and it's not always clear what we're anxious about, but I'm going to use them as overlapping terms and more or less meaning the same thing. So let me just tell you about some neuroscience. Dan Siegel has come up with a really simple metaphor to explain how the brain works in terms of the stress response. And he talks about the upstairs thinking brain and the downstairs emotional brain. So our brains have evolved over millions of years, and they've evolved from the bottom up. So they started out as a brain stem, and the first stress response that evolved was a freeze response. And you can see this when people they're like rooted to the spot. They're like a rabbit in headlights. They don't show much emotion. And that's the freeze stress response. And as we evolved over millions of years, the midbrain evolved, and this brought with it a more sophisticated stress response, which was the fight or flight stress response. And these two areas of the brain are our emotional brain. More time goes past, we evolve to live socially in groups as mammals, and we need therefore to do much more thinking and reasoning because social interaction is complicated. And so the brain develops another layer, the cortex, the thinking brain, which is used for planning, problem solving. And this added another more sophisticated stress response, which was about social interaction and communication. So when we perceive a threat, what happens is the alarm goes off in our downstairs brain, and the alarm is our amygdala, and that tells our body to leap into action, and it shuts down the thinking brain. So when we're stressed, we are not able to think clearly or plan, and our sense of time gets really disrupted. We can't kind of gauge time in the same way that we normally can. Once the upstairs brain has shut down, the downstairs brain, the midbrain and the brain stem activate these stress responses. And once the stress response is not needed anymore, then the upstairs brain can kind of come back online, and it can help us to calm down. This is really, really helpful to know. So what this looks like in terms of behavior, and this is any threat that we perceive, our kind of biology takes over and just automatically prepares us to respond to any perceived danger. And so think about what this looks like in a classroom. You can see the freeze response in terms of children just being unable to speak. Maybe they're put on the spot and they can't respond. You might see more aggressive behavior, verbally or physically. I know for me, my fight response is more impatience and kind of crankiness and shortness. And the flight response you might see in terms of students hiding under tables or running out of the classroom, or avoidance can be a form of the stress response as well. So it's really important to notice what triggers your stress responses and notice the impact it has on your ability to think, learn, and remember. When we're really stressed and we've perceived threat, we are not going to be able to take in information, to think it through, we're not going to be able to plan because our sense of time is disrupted, and we're not going to be able to learn. So as members of staff in schools, we need to be really aware that some children and students are coming in highly stressed, and they are not in a place biologically to be able to learn. Their thinking brain is shut down, and they're just living in their emotional brain. So just think about what triggers your stress. And the crucial thing is that we are all triggered by different things. So our stress response is the same, but what triggers our stress response depends on our perception. So I know for me, my stress response is triggered by heights. So the Eiffel Tower is not good for me because it has stairs and you can see right down through it, and it's really tall, and I don't like it, and I go into a stress response because I fell down the stairs when I was really little. So I've learnt that heights are dangerous, and so if I am standing somewhere, I will get this biological stress response happening. For other people, it might be animals like dogs. They might be afraid of dogs, while some of us love dogs. Or it might be, for example, parties. Some people might love parties. And for other people, social interaction is potentially threatening, and we get the stress response kicking off in that situation. So what I want to emphasize, I guess, at this point is that stress and anxiety are normal. They are wired into us. They're necessary because they keep us safe. And it's really important that we listen to our stress and anxiety and judge what we need to do about it, because it will look after us. It's our brain evolving over millions of years to keep us safe. And when you think about it from a young person's perspective, it makes sense that they would be stressed because they're very vulnerable, they can't look after themselves, and they need adults to take care of them. So it makes sense that young children would have separation anxiety. And then as they get older, their anxiety becomes, as their experiences widen of the world, their anxiety becomes about social interaction, their physical appearance, being injured, again being left on their own, or something happening to a member of their family. But it becomes about maybe world issues and kind of bigger things that maybe are less in their control. So stress is normal. We can't assume, though, that everybody has the same response to the same event. And I think that the pandemic really shows that, because whilst it has without doubt been something that none of us expected, and it has been very challenging, for some people, there have been real benefits actually in terms of slowing down a pace of life, being with their family, and their experience hasn't been too bad. Whereas for other people, the pandemic has been really, really challenging and difficult, and maybe they've experienced loss and felt very threatened and unsafe. And it's been a really difficult experience. So we can experience the same event in different ways. It's not about the event itself, but the person's experience of the event. The thing about stress is that some stress is really helpful, because it actually can enhance our performance. It makes us more alert. But at a point, if we have too much stress, it kind of really gets in the way. So I'm really hoping that my stress is adding to my performance at the moment rather than impairing it. But after a certain point, because our thinking brain has shut down, and we're not able to kind of plan or reason, and our social interaction is impaired, it's really difficult sometimes to perform things well. So the idea is that some stress is useful, and if we experience some stress, it can teach us that we can manage stress, we can overcome it, we can cope with it. And certainly events will happen in our lives that are stressful, and with the support of other people, we can cope and manage those events. But after a certain point, stress becomes very debilitating, and it becomes wired into our brain. We're living all the time in our downstairs emotional brain, and we're not able to think, reason, or learn. So we really need to think about how we manage our stress. We need to get to know it. We need to know what triggers it. And we need to try and keep it at kind of optimal levels where we can just challenge ourselves a little bit, but not overwhelm ourselves too much so that our whole system kind of shuts down. So I want to have a look at our body responses. And this is the stuff, the biology that kind of kicks off when the alarm goes off. This is what happens in our body. So this is the same for everybody, and it's normal to have an increased heart rate, to feel butterflies in your stomach. And so young children will often think that they feel unwell if they're anxious. So my son came home, for example, when he was about 7 or 8, and he had a 90-word Irish test, and he said to me, "I'm going to fail." And the day came of the Irish test, and he said, "I don't feel very well. I feel really sick." And I said, "I think that's just your anxiety and nervousness about the Irish test. Just go in and try it. It's okay if you fail. I don't think you will, but if you do, it's okay. Just give it a go and see what happens." And he did, and through that experience and through me supporting him to understand his physical symptoms were associated with anxiety, he's now aware that if he has something, he plays rugby now, so every rugby match he plays in, he gets a sick feeling in his stomach, but he knows that that's his anxiety, and he knows he just needs to kind of work through it really and recognize it for what it is. So if you are working with children and young people, and even for yourselves, if you need to calm your body down, it's really helpful to just focus on your breathing. And if you can slow your breathing down, your heart rate will slow down, and that will make you feel calmer. And in that respect, if you can calm your body down, it can help you to think more clearly, and it can help you to manage your feelings of anxiety a little bit more and think through your choices around your behavior. You can also use your senses to really become aware of the present moment and just notice what you can see, feel, hear, taste, or smell, and that can bring you back and really regulate you and relax your body, and that can be really helpful in managing anxiety. So my sons now, if I'm out driving and I have a bit of road rage, they know to say, "Do your milkshake breathing, Mum," and that can calm me down. I want to just look at feelings and thinking about how we can work with young people to recognize their emotions and to help them to regulate it. So when somebody is really stressed, there's no point in talking at them because their thinking brain is offline. They just won't be able to make sense of it. What we really need to do is focus on calming them down and regulating their body and their thoughts and their feelings. And we need to help them to become calm so that we can then relate to them. And then when they're calm, we can help them think through what they need to do. So in terms of working with anxiety and young people, it's really important to teach them emotional vocabulary. And you'll see that flower diagram there on the left has lots of different emotions in it. And you'll see that each petal has different intensities of each emotion. And that's really helpful, is to try and think about emotion on an intensity scale. So there's an example there of an intensity scale. Some teachers that I've worked with, I mean, they're just so creative and imaginative. They might use traffic light colours. So I had one teacher that gave one of her students a wristband with the 3 traffic light colours on, and he could point to how he was feeling and how stressed he was. Another teacher, we were working with one of her students. He was on the autistic spectrum, and he had a history of when he got stressed, he got triggered by maths, difficult maths problems, particularly, but also other demands to do with work. And he would try and run away or hide, and then if that didn't work, he would have a meltdown and he would become very physical. And we worked with him on his scale, and he could recognize that the buildup of his stress involved a stage where he went from calm through to this kind of flight, escape, stress response, and then into the fight stress response. And that was really helpful to recognize that was his pattern of his stress response. So we need to notice what's going on in our bodies when we feel stressed. We need to notice what triggers our stress, and we need to notice that our thoughts and feelings can be linked. So we can get caught up into these thinking, feeling loops. So for example, I can think, I'm going to mess up this presentation. And I can feel really tense and nervous when I think that way. And then I'm going to think people are going to ask me questions I can't answer, and I'm going to feel even more anxious. And then I'm going to think, or maybe I can avoid it by just pretending to be ill. Trust me, I had that thought at 3:30 this afternoon. And actually momentarily I feel relieved when I think, okay, I can just get out of it. But then I think, oh, I'm just pathetic in comparison to others. And then I feel inferior. I might feel worthless because I can't cope. And these kind of loops are the things that we get caught up in mentally in our head at about 3 in the morning when we wake up, and we have this kind of washing machine brain going on, which is just moving around and around between thoughts and feelings, and it's just making it all worse. So let's have a think about thinking. Thinking can be either words like a commentary, or it can be pictures or images or like a film in our head. So anxiety is kind of typically the kind of thoughts are an overestimation of the threat that we're facing and an underestimation of our capacity to cope. So it's going to be really bad. I can do nothing to stop it, and I won't cope. This kind of threat estimation being about the likelihood of it happen and how awful it's going to be. And often that leads to avoidance. We just don't want to do it because it doesn't feel good. There's a lot of stuff going on biologically in terms of our body responses, and it just doesn't feel comfortable. So it's much easier to just not do it. And of course, short term, that really works because it's a huge relief. But long term, it just makes it worse because we never get any evidence that we can cope. We never get to practice our skills. We never realize that actually it's not as bad as we thought it was going to be. Another thing that is really helpful to be aware of is that we can get into patterns or habits of thinking, which can be really unhelpful. So anxiety tends to be hallmarked by thoughts that are orientated about what might happen in the future, and it'll be bad and I won't cope. But other types of thinking that can lead to anxiety can be black and white thinking. So that's thinking in absolutes. So I'm a complete failure. This day is going to be terrible. I'm already late. Might be a catastrophizing thought where we're overestimating the chance of disaster happening. Fortune telling is about predicting the future or jumping to conclusions and usually predicting negatively what might happen. Mind reading is thinking that we know what other people are thinking. Eleanor Roosevelt said famously, "What others think of me is none of my business." But that's all very well, but it's really difficult if you're socially anxious. You're trying to predict threat, your brain is trying to make sense of it, and you tend to try and assume that you know what other people are thinking, and of course we never do, and often they're not thinking about us, they're thinking about themselves. But a lot of us get caught up into thinking that we can read other people's minds, and we know what they're thinking about us in particular. And emotional reasoning is using our feelings as evidence of how something is. So I feel anxious, so it must be a really scary thing. We really want to be able to tolerate uncertainty and frustration, and no more so than these times that we're living in at the moment. And low frustration tolerance is an assumption that we won't cope and it'll be unbearable. So we really want to try and accept that, you know, we don't know what's going to happen, and sometimes it's really frustrating, and we just have to kind of live with that and accept it. So just the other thoughts that can come up that can be problematic can be about perfectionism. I don't have time to go into that in this talk, but this is really about self-imposed demanding standards that we set for ourselves and we pursue despite this causing huge difficulties. And then we evaluate ourselves based on how well we meet these high standards or not. And if we make a mistake, then we tend to apply it to being about all of us as a person, rather than, oh, look, I made a mistake in that task. We tend to think, oh, well, you know, I can't do this, I'm a failure completely. And perfectionism can often lead to avoidance in form of procrastination or delay in starting something because we're afraid that we won't do it perfectly. So what's the answer? The answer is to be aware of our thinking and to try and focus on the helpful stuff, because a lot of those thinking patterns were a bit distorted. They were a bit out of balance. They were focusing on the negative. And we have to remember that our brain is wired to do that, because our brain is looking for danger all of the time. So we're automatically going to hone in on the negatives and on the threat, because we're just trying to keep ourselves safe. But what we need to try and do is counteract that and really focus on the helpful stuff. So I really like this story. A grandfather told his grandson, there are two wolves struggling inside each of us. One is vengeful, angry, resentful, self-pitying and scared, and the other compassionate, faithful, hopeful and caring. Which wolf wins? His grandson asks. The one you feed. So it really is about paying attention to what's helpful. And I really like the idea of helpful and unhelpful rather than positive and negative, because I think that all thoughts and feelings are useful. It's really about what we do with it that matters. So notice your thoughts, pay attention to what's helpful, evaluate how realistic or balanced your thoughts are, and we can work on trying to help young people to challenge their thoughts, but to do that, they really have to buy the alternative. So you know, I might say to my son, you know, you're gonna be great. You're gonna definitely do okay at that match, and he might not buy that because, well, you know, you would say that because you're my mom, aren't you? So we've got to make it credible. We've got to really have a realistic thought. Sometimes, of course, we need to just accept our thoughts and realize that they are just thoughts, and thoughts come and go. So sometimes it's our thoughts can be very realistic, but it's just not helpful to focus on them. So we can think of thoughts like clouds in the sky, or like leaves floating on a stream. Or we can think of our thoughts like a car driving up. And this was really helpful to a 16-year-old student I was working with who was doing her junior cert. She really liked this metaphor. So I said, well, think of your thoughts when they come. It's just like a car driving up, and the door opens, and you can either get in and go off with that thought, and it'll take you to a place you don't want to go. So it might be, I'm going to, everyone's going to laugh at me when I get this wrong. And you can get into that thought, that car, and you can go off and get into that thinking, feeling loop, and it's not going to help you to actually go in and cope. So what you need to do is just see the car drive up, the door will open, don't get in, let the car drive off. And this idea that thoughts can come and go, and we just have to notice them and not get caught up in them, not get fused with them. And these techniques are called diffusion, cognitive diffusion. So we might just notice and say, oh yeah, there's my failure thought coming up. And we just let it go and try and move on to something else that's more helpful. Another tip from one of the students that I've been working with, this is an 18-year-old student who was doing her leaving certificate, and she did a lot of, she was very, very aware of her own experiences internally, and it really helped her to take perspective. So she said, what really helps me is to imagine I'm on Pluto and I have an enormous telescope and I'm looking back through the universe at myself on Earth, and I realize I am so small and irrelevant, and really none of it matters, and it will all be okay. So this is perspective taking, stepping outside, not getting caught up in our thoughts, and just being able to observe them coming and going. So what I'm suggesting is it's really helpful if we can start to notice different aspects of our experience of anxiety, and actually be more flexible. So it's helpful to be able to track our behavior and thoughts, to notice the helpful stuff and not discount it, to challenge and get more balance into our thoughts, and make them more realistic, or accept our thoughts are going to come and let them go, and then to have a go at doing something different. So thoughts are beliefs, and the beliefs that we have about our abilities can have profound effect on those abilities. And this is the concept of self-efficacy, and it's our belief in our ability to do what we need to do to achieve our goals. So self-efficacy is really, really important in learning. It's going to determine how much effort we make in reaching our goal, how much we persist. And if we have high self-efficacy, we're much more likely to be active participants in our learning. So some of the ways we can develop self-efficacy, we can think about previous experiences of success. We can think about other people who are like me, and if they can do it, then I can do it too. We can believe people when they say you can do it, and if they are particular role models for us, this can be really, really helpful. We can imagine or visualize ourselves doing something really well. This is used quite a lot in sport. And all of that is much easier if we are looking after our health and well-being. It's much more difficult to have self-efficacy if we are not feeling very well or really, really struggling with anxiety. So self-efficacy in relation to learning is linked to our mindset. And Carol Dweck has talked about a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. It's not that we have either or, we have combinations of both, but essentially a fixed mindset sees our intelligence and talent as innate and fixed, and it won't change. And that belief or those thoughts seem to lead to us giving up easily, avoiding challenges, that effort is a waste of time. We might see feedback as critical. We might see other people's success as very threatening. We just don't achieve our potential. There's no point, because you've either got it or you haven't. Whereas a growth mindset is a belief that that we can develop, that if we work at it, we might be successful. It makes effort and persistence and practice worthwhile. It means that we'll persist in the face of setbacks, and we tend to embrace challenges and be able to learn from feedback and be inspired by others' success. And this is really, really important in relation to learning. It's just to believe that it's possible, that we will make progress. And this is kind of summed up by a brilliant quote by Michael Jordan, who talks about failure and how important failure is, and that it doesn't define who we are. So in terms of failure, mistakes are so useful. They provide information that we can learn from, and this is a really helpful way of thinking about them. So if I'm working with a young person and doing an assessment, what I'll say to them is, I'm actually more interested in what you get wrong than what you get right, because that would tell me what you need to learn next. Mistakes are, if we're working with young people, it's really helpful if we can give them constructive feedback about how to improve. And praise is really important, but to make it really good praise, you need to do much more of the praise in relation or ratio to the negative or critical comments. You need to do praise straight away, particularly for younger children. You need to think about whether the person would like public praise, or whether they're very self-conscious and they need more private praise. You need to think about, okay, well, I could do this verbally, but I could also do it non-verbally. I could have a secret signal, like I could give a thumbs up to signal to somebody that they're doing something really well. Praise that's specific is really helpful, and it's really important not just to praise the outcome, but to praise effort and process. So things like showing the process of drafting a piece of work, so that it's not just about the end perfect product, that it's actually about really recognizing the process that people go through, and not combining praise with criticism. No buts. You did that really well, but if you'd only done this, it would have been even better. Let's just talk then briefly about behaviour. And again, what we're looking for is flexibility and the importance of just having a go. So remember, I said the thing about anxiety is it often leads to avoidance. And what we need to do is just try it, just start something and just be curious about what happens. So this is a picture of a doll. I don't know if you can see her. There she is. This doll was really, really worried about coming to school. She really missed her mum. She didn't know how to read, and she was worried about getting teased about that. So I was working with a 7-year-old, and I said, what do you think she is feeling and thinking? And you can see her drawing there on the left-hand side. You can see her thoughts in her head. You can see her shaky hands. You can see her jelly knees. You can see her upset stomach, looking very sad. And you can see her drowning in tears. She's really anxious about coming to school. And on the right is this little girl's view of, we did a lot of work over a number of sessions. She had a fabulous teacher and a brilliant supportive mum. And we were able to work with her about recognizing some of her thinking and just having a go and trying things, and how would she feel if she did that and it worked out for her. And you can see she's got her school backpack on, she's got her teacher beside her, she's got her skippy feet skipping into school. And so she's able to set up this kind of scale between the top of the anxiety scale and the feeling of happiness, and begin to work out where she is on the anxiety scale. But we did it through the doll, or I use puppets, because quite often young people find it quite difficult to talk about their own experiences. But if you invent a character, it's often much easier for them to do that. And I've done that with 18-year-olds and 7-year-olds and 6-year-olds. So in terms of behaviour, what's really helpful is to have a go. But the first thing is to think about, well, what might I do? How might I handle this? And this is the idea of problem solving. So again, it's to think about what's the problem, what are the different ways I could handle it, and what might happen in each case. What's the worst case scenario? What might be the good stuff that might come out of handling it in that way? And that process, and you can do it through drawing it out rather than writing, can help us to make an informed choice about our behaviour. And of course, we can only do that when we're calm. We can't do any of this thinking through about our behaviour when we're stressed. So that's why we need to regulate first, and then through a supportive relationship, help children and young people to reason. The picture on the right is the same 7-year-old girl. She's drawn a ladder of different steps to help her to be able to come into school and work on her goal, which is to read out loud in front of the class. And you can see she's got a brilliant stepped process there about all the things that she needs to do, and she did it. And that was many, many years ago. I don't know how she is now. I hope she's doing okay. But problem solving is part of a technique called emotion coping. And this is bringing together labeling, recognizing, labeling feelings. Obviously, we can't just excuse aggressive behavior. We have to keep people safe. So we need to put limits on behavior. It's no good just saying, oh, well, it's my stress response, that's why I hit him. We need to find a different way of expressing our stress, maybe talking about it, but certainly doing something that is fair and safe for ourselves and others. And then when children are calm, we can talk it through with them. So just to say, of course, it's really important to think about the context, and it's no good expecting people to be anxious if we're asking them to do the impossible. So as members of staff, we really need to think about the tasks that we're setting. We need to think about how we are supporting them to do that task. And we need to think about the skills that the young person has. And the idea is that we are just challenging them just the right amount. So not too difficult, not too easy so that they're bored, just right, the Goldilocks principle of just right amount of challenge, staying in the zone of proximal development. So what I've tried to do in this whistle-stop tour is to talk to you about the different elements that are important in terms of managing stress and supporting young people's well-being and resilience. And essentially, it's about understanding stress and making sure we feel safe, knowing how to calm ourselves down. And as adults, we need to be calm so that we can then help our young people stay calm and regulate themselves back to a calm place, because they'll pick up if we're stressed. So we have to calm ourselves first. And the importance of supportive relationships for young people in terms of how we model coping with stress and how we support young people to learn skills. And all of this is really relevant and important for the educational context. And the educational context is so important to help students in terms of developing their well-being and resilience. Hobful talked about what we need to do in times of trauma, and it's all the same stuff. A sense of safety, which is about being aware of our stress response and keeping people feeling safe, giving them the skills to calm, helping them have supportive relationships so that they can do what they need to do and have hope that things will work out okay. So I've covered so much in that talk. If you are interested in any of this, there are so many resources on the education.ie website. You can get to it either through going to the education website and looking at schools and colleges and the information section and click on wellbeing and education, or you can go into the back to school campaign, and again you can find all of the wellbeing resources. That includes the wellbeing toolkit and the webinars. There's loads there, and it goes into much more detail about some of the things that I have talked about. So my take home message is, finally, I really want you to think about not getting rid of your anxiety, but making friends with it. I want you to notice it, notice what triggers you, notice your stress levels, notice how that feels in your body, what your thoughts are and your behaviors, and notice if you're avoiding something particularly. Know how to regulate and calm yourself, know what it takes, and take time to do it. Relate to people who are helpful, who validate your feelings, believe in you, and encourage you to have a go. And pay attention to the helpful stuff. And this might mean tolerating discomfort or uncertainty or frustration if you need to learn from it. But accept that you can only change what you can change. The whole kind of goal of wellbeing and resilience is around psychological flexibility and flexibility of behavior. So think about your options, do some problem solving, think about step-by-step planning, and just one step at a time. It starts with 2 feet on the floor, get out of bed, do the next right thing. You can cope. I believe in you. Know what really matters to you and show up. Have a go, make a start, and just be curious. Just do an experiment and see what happens, because it's all useful information. It's life. Even the mistakes and failures, it's what you do with it that matters. Thank you so much for listening. I need to say, don't I, about the study.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's been a really interesting talk. And even I can see from the chat already that loads of people are commenting and saying that they found it really useful. I think even myself, I learned a few things about managing my own stress and anxiety. I think I feel much more calm after listening to you. So I'm just going to share for a minute or two about the study that we're running. So it's a study looking at both parents and young people's mental health knowledge. So there's a parent component and a young person's component. And just if there's any parents, we'd really appreciate if you could take, it takes 10 minutes to do it, and then to pass it onto your adolescents as well, because we're quite low on the number of adolescents that we have participating, and also the number of fathers too. So if there's any dads out there too, we'd really, really appreciate if you could take the time to do the study. So I know we have loads of questions coming in. Aoife, do you want to start off? I think you've been keeping an eye on them. We won't be able to get through them all, but we might be able to get through some of them.
Yeah, so Elizabeth, there's a couple of questions on kind of managing panic attacks or a fear of failure around exam time, and if you have any tips for that.
Okay. Yeah, so a panic attack, there's a really nice handout on the education.ie website about panic attacks, so have a look at that, because that'll give you detail. But essentially that's kind of an interpretation. It's our biology, and we interpret it in a kind of catastrophic way. So we believe that our body is out of control and we're going to have a heart attack, but it's just your stress response, and it will pass. So try and do some grounding and breathing. That might really help you. I know that's really hard when you're kind of hyperventilating, but it will pass. Try and use your helpful thoughts. All of the information is in the handout, and it's really clear and simple. And I've used that with some students who were having panic attacks. They found it really helpful. And the grounding technique of using your senses can be really helpful as well. And then the other bit was about exam. What was the other bit, Aoife, about exam stress?
Yeah, kind of a fear of failure surrounding exams and finding it more difficult to study.
I know, that's just, I really relate to that, because I said I'm studying myself, so I'm a terrible procrastinator, and I was doing this stuff on perfectionism. I was thinking, well, that's it, I'm a textbook case. So I really relate to that. I think my top tip for that is just do it. Just do it. Do an experiment, and it actually doesn't matter. What's the worst that can happen? Yeah, you could fail. Do you know what? It doesn't define you. You're still you. You can do it again. It will be okay. Just try it and see what happens. Do an experiment. I love this idea of behavioral experiments where we just have a go and see what happens. So I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to do this behavioral experiment. I'm just going to do this presentation and see what happens, and just be curious. And it's really hard, but it's just to really do it. And yeah, and to view mistakes as helpful, I think, as well. It's all good learning. And there's always another chance. So just go for it and show your best self. You can do it. I believe in you, is what I would say.
Thanks, Elizabeth. There's a couple of people here as well wondering if you could explain the milkshake breathing.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So milkshake breathing is a really nice technique that is in Friends, which is a program that has been rolled out by NEPS in many schools. And milkshake breathing, we teach it to young children, but you can imagine you've got a milkshake in front of you and you've got a long straw, and you take a big breath and you blow down the straw and you try and make the bubbles last as long as you possibly can. So essentially it's deep breathing. Take a big dip and then blowing out and making the bubbles, and that's milkshake breathing. And I taught it to my sons when they were little, which is why they tell me now to do my milkshake breathing when I'm having road rage.
Brilliant. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'll just have a look here and see if there's any more questions. Would you have any tips on maybe as a parent supporting a child who would have quite high expectations of themselves and catastrophizing thoughts, who might then recognize that they're having these thoughts, but it's still continuing?
Yeah, so again, it's that overestimation of threat and underestimation of coping. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and make them be far more realistic about their perception of threat. So, how bad is it really going to be if you don't achieve this, or if you don't get what you want? And I'm going to really try and promote their sense that they can cope, to just do it and go for it. And I'm here. I've got your back. Even if the worst happens, you can come back to me and we will sort it out together. But it's trying to recognize the thoughts as the kind of unrealistic, distorted thoughts that they are, and be a little bit more balanced and realistic. So we're looking for positives, and we're looking for evidence that might counteract some of those catastrophic thoughts. We might be paying attention to times when things went really well, when young people showed really good coping, and we're really going to focus in on that to try and counteract this over attention to threat. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Maybe we have time for just one last question. There's a question here about calming down your teenager, and is that different in a teenager who'd have autism as opposed to a neurotypical teenager?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a really interesting question, actually. I would say in general, with younger children and possibly with young people on the autistic spectrum, I might use more body strategies, sensory regulation. I might be using more of that because their thinking can be quite rigid and rule-based. So I'm probably going to go at it, and I would with younger children. I'd be much more emphasizing behavior, and I'd be working on shaping behavior and flexible behavior, and I would probably be working on teaching sensory regulation and relaxation and body, calming the body as well. I think that would be how I would start. Now, saying that, I have done lots of work with teenagers with autism, and sometimes they're really able to recognize some of the thoughts, and it can be really helpful sometimes to just point out some of the distorted thinking patterns, and then they begin to recognize them, and social stories can actually be really helpful as well around, if I'm thinking this, then I can distract myself, and I can say you can give them a script which is maybe a more balanced version that's not quite as negatively focused.
That's brilliant, Elizabeth. Thank you.
So I think that's all we have time for today, but if anyone's interested, we still have 2 more talks in our webinar series. Next week, it's going to be about a panel discussion about how to talk to a young person about how they're feeling. And then after that, it'll be self-compassion approaches for young people. But thank you so much to everyone who joined us tonight, and thank you to Elizabeth and for the talk. It was really informative and really interesting. And as well, thank you to Aoife and the rest of the committee that have helped in organising these talks.